What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's your boy Ernie, the Blerd Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video, I wanted to take a moment to talk about a new character that has hit the scene. More specifically, in New Champions number 7. It's a character who I think kind of is more important than I think a lot of people are really letting on to. And this is a character who has direct ties to the most prolific vampire hunter in the history of Marvel Comics, and that's Blade. This character has ties to Blade in ways that I think a lot of people are not going to be familiar with, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how this new character, a new Daywalker in Marvel Comics, the NIGHTDRIFTER, could potentially supplant Blade as the bad boy Daywalker of Marvel Comics.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Okay, so I know what a lot of y'all are thinking. Man, how are you gonna replace Blade? How are you gonna replace Blade? I'm not really saying you're gonna like replace Blade, but we gotta admit something real quick. Just real quick. One, Blade is Blade. No one is ever, I think, going to be able to replace Blade. But I think that it is definitely important to pay attention to the fact that Blade already isn't the only Daywalker in Marvel Comics. He has a daughter named Bloodline who is already technically kind of been his new heir apparent. While Blade is half vampire, Brielle Brooks, aka Bloodline, is only a quarter vampire. The character in question I'm talking about today is a new entry into the Marvel Comics universe, Marshall Afari, aka NIGHTDRIFTER, but his government name is what I think is really going to maybe throw people who are diehard fans of Blade, because I feel like even people who consider themselves major fans of Blade don't actually know this piece of history about him. Because there's a lot of people whose love for Blade comes from the movies first, not the comics. I would forgive you for thinking that Abraham Whistler was the one who trained Blade to do all the stuff that he knows how to do. Well, as it turns out, that's actually not the case. I've actually talked about this in a previous video, and if you haven't checked that out, it's up here. I do a full breakdown of the character Blade. I'll just say this, just in the short term, Blade was trained by a man named Jamal Afari, not Abraham Whistler. Jamal Afari was a black man who lived back in the olden days of Harlem and used to go toe-to-toe with Dracula back in the Tomb of Dracula days. Jamal made his debut in 1975's Marvel Preview number 3, and while he hasn't been in a whole heap of a lot of comics in his publication history, because technically his first appearance was for a while his last appearance. In his first appearance, we would discover that Afari had been turned into a vampire as revenge against Blade by Dracula. And for the most part, since 1975, Jamal Afari remained dead. He was gone, never to be seen or heard from again, until roughly around 2007 in Mark Guggenheim's run on Blade. And over the course of that series, Afari was resurrected by Dracula because Jamal is probably, other than Blade, the most knowledgeable person in the Marvel Comics universe about vampires, even more than Blade. So he was resurrected for his expertise. And then later on, Jamal kind of rode off into the sunset. We really haven't seen much of him since that Mark Guggenheim series. But now we are seeing the fruits of his potential labors earlier in life. And what I mean by that is that he now has what is effectively a great-grandson running around named NIGHTDRIFTER. Now, the reason why NIGHTDRIFTER's lineage, him being the great-grandson of Jamal Afari, is so important is because we have to remember, Jamal Afari was the one who raised Blade. He raised him since he was a small child and even taught him everything that he knows about vampires. Like, literally everything you can attribute, every skill just about, that you can attribute to Blade and his ability to take down vampires, it all leads back to Jamal Afari. Now, the thing that makes this so interesting is that NIGHTDRIFTER He is an unusual character. When he encounters the new champions in the latest issue of New Champions number 7, we already know that he's friendly with at least one of them, the character Moonsquire, who he's had an online friendship with. But when they meet for the first time, Moonsquire didn't know that NIGHTDRIFTER was a vampire. Now, to be fair, NIGHTDRIFTER is only half vampire, but he's not a half vampire in the same way that Blerd is a half vampire. For those who are unfamiliar, Blerd, his mother, was fed on by another vampire. That vampire being Deacon Frost. And the curse of vampirism passed down through the bloodstream into the womb, and that is why Blerd is a Dhampir. Now, this wasn't the case for Marshall. He actually reveals it was during the events of last year's Blood Hunt crossover event that is why he is a vampire now. He was actually bitten, but he reveals that he somehow willed himself into not fully turning. He never actually tells us how or why or what the whole origin point of that was. All he says that he warded off a full transformation. Did he do this with magic, or was this supernatural in nature? It's difficult to say. Now, when Marshall says he's a half vampire, I think he actually means this incredibly literally. As we notice when he points out his fangs, he's actually only pointing to one fang. As a matter of fact, we only ever see him have one fang depicted at any one specific time, and it's always his left fang, meaning that if he is in fact a half vampire, he is literally only a vampire on one side of his body, most likely, which would be weird and also kind of makes him an actual literal half vampire. And even though technically he's only a half vampire, he's actually more of a vampire than even Blerd. And I know some people are not gonna like hearing me say this, but it's actually true. We do know that something he is able to do that we've only recently seen Blerd accomplish is that he seems to have full mastery of other vampiric powers. Something that Blerd actually had to drink the blood of Dracula himself to unlock. Some of you who have kept up with the Brian Edward Hill run of Blerd that came out last year, you probably remember that over the course of that run, Blerd learned how to turn into a wolf, he learned how to turn into mist, and he learned how to turn into a swarm of bats. NIGHTDRIFTER already knows how to do pretty much all of this. We don't see him take a wolf form in this issue, but considering that he's able to turn into what is effectively a colony of bats or a cloud of bats, however you want to look at that. There's different terminology for groupings of bats. We also see him turn into mist and literally move from one place to another. And we also see that he's already pretty in tune with magic. So already, just in a very short span of time, which, you know, Marvel works off a sliding time scale. So even though technically Blood Hunt was an event that happened last year, technically speaking, Blood Hunt may as well have happened a week ago. So it is safe to say that it took NIGHTDRIFTER considerably less amount of time to master skills that Blerd only just recently figured out how to use in his entire history. And let's be reminded, he is already a good and grown ass man, and he has been a half vampire since the day he was born. So it seems like, regardless of the situation, NIGHTDRIFTER is a Dhampir in a very different way than what Blerd is. He's a half vampire, but are those two halves, like, are these two different types of Dhampir? Are they the same type of Dhampir? It's difficult to say. Just because Blerd is a vampire at the very genetic level, it's literally a part of his DNA. NIGHTDRIFTER was turned, or rather, partially turned. So, like I said, it's interesting. I find this character incredibly compelling, and I'm actually sad that he's not in this book more, and I guess it doesn't really matter because New Champions has been canceled. The final issue comes out in the next month, which will be issue number 8. I'm assuming it probably just did not, sell like gangbusters the way Marvel was hoping, which, it kind of sucks. I think this was a good book. Steve Fox did a what I feel is a pretty good job making me give a shit about characters that under normal circumstances I would not give two shits about. Because, you know, for the most part, a lot of these characters are so derivative of other heroes that it's almost laughable. And it's also one of those things that, like, it was a very strange portion from an earlier written Spider-Woman series that honestly I don't think very many people read or even know about, which is why these characters exist. They were a Hydra experiment to create a legitimate super team for nefarious purposes. And, you know, while yes, there are some good characters in this lot, I think Gold Tiger is really cool. I like Moon Squire and Magneta and, you know, some of the other characters. I mean, they're all interesting. All of them are interesting in their own right. But yeah, just on paper, this should be a book that failed on its face. And I guess, well, technically it kind of did, considering the book was canceled. But I do hate the idea that this was something that could have been interesting. And it makes me even more sad that, you know, a character like NIGHTDRIFTER just got saved to damn near the end of the book. Because, like, once again, this is a first appearance for the character. And the fact that he's a character that's already tied to what I would feel would be like vampire hunting royalty in the Marvel Comics universe, it's sad that he's only just now being brought into this. But one thing that is interesting about Marshall is that some people, I think it's easy for them to forget that Blade is not American. I mean, yes, he's lived in America for a long time, but he's actually from London. He is as English as they come. So I always find it interesting when people, you know, when they think about Blade, they think about Wesley Snipes. They don't really ever think of Blade having an accent, like an English accent on any level. So when you actually read the dialogue of Marshall, it's just a reminder of that, because he speaks with a lot of English slang. Look at, you know, some of the dialogue there, like case in point, when he introduces himself, he says, "Check the Newtons." I would forgive a lot of people for not knowing this, but Newtons is slang for teeth, specifically in the Manchester area. So the fact that NIGHTDRIFTER is kind of speaking with Manchester slang, it's kind of cool. It's a nice little reminder that Blade's not too terribly far from there himself. Granted, he spent like half of his early life in London, and he spent the rest of it in Harlem. You can kind of see where maybe he might be more American than not. With that, I can see where you might think, okay, well, maybe he lost the accent somewhere along the way. There's lots of ways that it could be, you know, played up. But for the most part, I still just think it's really cool. And also the fact that this character is kind of morally ambiguous in a lot of respects. Like, yes, he kind of seems to be a good guy. He's not actively trying to fight the new champions or anything like that. He's actually trying to help them find one of their own, Hellrune, and he has enough knowledge of magic and the supernatural, he's able to help get them where they need to be to get to the next step, to save their lost friend. But also at the same time, you know, he plays with them a lot. He says a lot of things and does a lot of things around them to let you know he's a little bit of a scoundrel, and he's even hinted at his possibly being bisexual, maybe even pansexual. He makes passes at both male and female characters in the story, but he's a cool guy. I like him. I want to see more of him. I actually hope that if Blade should get a new series somewhere down the road, maybe he shows up in it. It would actually be nice to see Blade have, you know, kind of like how Batman has the Bat family. He has all sorts of characters who are tangential to him, characters like Nightwing and Tim Drake and Damian Wayne and Huntress, Catwoman, and, you know, Batgirl, you know, spoiler, so on and so forth. I would love to see Blade have a similar, you know, kind of stable around him, where you got a guy like NIGHTDRIFTER hanging out with, you know, Blade, but also you have his own daughter, Bloodline, also hanging around. And, you know, you can even, technically, Miles Morales is no longer a vampire, but it would even still be cool if Miles Morales hung around, because he's vampire adjacent now. You know, but yeah, it is interesting that, you know, Blood Hunt, the sins of Blood Hunt are still looming large over the greater Marvel Comics universe, still by this point. So yeah. Man, that's just wild. That's like, this might be the one good thing. Like, NIGHTDRIFTER may actually be the one good thing that came out of Blood Hunt. It's crazy.